Good evening, everyone. We are just waiting for a quorum. We need 6 elected members to start the meeting, so apologies for the delay. Apparently we have half an hour that we can help to make this happen. Good evening, everybody, and apologies for this delay. What we're going to do, we do have an elected member who can get here, has just been caught in traffic, so we are going to adjourn the meeting to 7 p.m. and resume then. I appreciate that there are people who are in the gallery who wish to present questions and statements. It's really up to you if you wish to return, but we do have a copy of your questions and statements, so we will take them all on board if you do not come back at 7. Apologies to press, and that's where we're at. Thank you. So I now, at 6 p.m, adjourn the meeting to 7 p.m. Just referring to CEO, do we need to say anything else?
No, that's all we need to do.
Okay, thank you. I declare the opening of the meeting of the 27th of May 2021 held in Council Chambers at the City Subiaco open at 7 p.m. I welcome councillors, staff, the media and members of the community. On behalf of the City Subiaco, I acknowledge the Wudja Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and the waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. Please note this meeting is being recorded and live streamed. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Recordings will be made available on the City website following the meeting. Confidential sections of council minutes will not be live streamed or recorded. There are no confidential sections to this meeting tonight. Moving on to item 2, attendance, apologies and leave of absence. We have apologies from Mayor Penny Taylor due to a financial conflict from a donation for the mayoral campaign. We also have apologies from Councillor Jodie Mansfield, Councillor Matt Davis and Councillor Angela Hammersley. We have a leave of absence from Councillor Rick Powell, and we have a later apologies from Councillor Rowe. Disclosure of interest. We do have one disclosure of interest from Councillor Jennings. Councillor Jennings, would you like to present that disclosure?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I, Lynette Jennings, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its special council meeting to be held on 27 May 2021, agenda items SC1 and SC2. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality. The nature of my interest is John Taylor, the principal of the firm John Taylor Architects, has provided a heritage assessment to the city about the buildings, the subject of the application in item SC1. John Taylor is my brother-in-law. I've had no communication directly or indirectly with John Taylor about these matters, and until I read the agenda report, was unaware he had been retained by the city to provide the assessment. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register, signed by me today. Thanks.
Thank you. We now have conditions of entry statement, which is read by the Chief Executive Officer. Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you, Presiding Member. The conditions of entry and behaviour to this agenda briefing forum are contained in a statement displayed on the door on entry to the chamber. Please ensure you are familiar with the conditions so that the meeting can be conducted at an appropriate standard.
Moving on to item 4 and public question time. We have a question from Jackie Greenshields of Salisbury Street, Subiaco. Would you like to come up to the rostrum? Thank you.
Jackie Greenshields, 97 Salisbury Street, Subiaco. Dear Deputy Mayor, Councillors, CEO and staff. Question 1. Can you please inform me of when the 2-storey heritage building, which was at 458 Hay Street, was demolished? Before it was demolished, it was the ladies' boutique called Lady Tramp and was next to the original National Bank building. It also had a large Dunlop logo on the eastern wall, which we've lost, a beautiful building lost. And it was originally a news agency in the early 1900s to the mid-1950s. And question 2, who requested the demolition of this heritage building? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director of Community and Development Services, thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member. In response to the first question, officers would need to review hard copy property files which are kept off-site to have a determinative date. From a brief review of aerial imagery, it appears that the subject site was redeveloped around 1999, following council approval in June 1998. In response to the second question, Summer Mist, Winter Mist, Autumn Mist and Sanua are listed as the landowners of 464 Hay Street in publicly available Ordinary Council and Built Environment Committee meeting minutes of June 1998, when approval was granted for the existing proposed office, retail and car park development. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Greenshields. Are you satisfied with the answer to that question? Otherwise, the staff will have to... That's fine, thank you. Now, agenda item 5, public statement time. We have Julie Matheson. Would you like to approach the rostrum, and welcome back to the gallery, Julie.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, Councillor Stroud, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here tonight, councillors, the press and the public gallery. I'm particularly heartened that this special council meeting called on the future of these Hay Street buildings, and the excellent officers' report. It was really good. I do hope you can call a special council meeting before submissions close on the 11th of June to vote on the Subiaco Oval and Precinct design guidelines to preserve the reserve for future infill of the surrounding Subiaco leader vault. I am speaking in favour of the developer retaining and restoring. Is this crackling? Sounds crackling. Yeah. Anyway, I should keep going. I'm speaking in favour of the developer retaining and restoring the front elevation of former Commonwealth Bank and buildings to for generations of visitors and businesses to the Hay Street shopping strip. Mr Malcolm Mackay, who's with us this evening, a spokesman for Sanua, also spoke on behalf of Save Subi. Thank you. Do I get another? That's right. Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Yes, Mr Malcolm Mackay, who's a spokesman for Sanua, also spoke on behalf of Save Subi to encourage development at the Hay Street East End during LPS 5 consultation. Hay Street East is the right location for this type of demolition or development, and it has been rezoned accordingly with an amendment to LPS 5, which I put up when I was supported by Council unanimously and the Minister for Planning in 2019. On the 5th of March, Mr Mackay reportedly said the walls were cracking and give rise to structural failure, and the city's report was fundamentally flawed. But if that is the case, then my property, which is Ruby Hutchison House, where I live, should be demolished too, because similar cracking has occurred. There are many great tradespeople in Subiaco that have the skills and knowledge to repair cracking walls and structural failure. Please refer to the Planning and Development Regulations 2015, Part 9, Clause 67, for reasons to protect Subiaco's character, heritage and streetscapes from demolition by neglect and unmerited development. The Council, SAT and the DAP must have due regard to these regulations and have the power to save these buildings at Hay Street. Council's report called Assessment of Rockaby Road and Hay Street Heritage Area, dated January 2013 on page 12, noted that it supported the aesthetic streetscape, strong heritage character and historic uses of the intact buildings on Hay Street. The condition of the Hay Street buildings were classified as in good condition and well maintained, all capable of conservation. Councillors, the Local Government Act gives you the power to represent electors of the district in your role as elected members. Please use the relevant government planning instruments and your own reports and especially the excellent report prepared by the planning officers for this evening's meeting to protect the buildings on Hay Street for future generations of business owners and visitors to the historic suburb of Subiaco, gazetted in 1897. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms Matheson, and for your interest. The officer comment states, as outlined in the officer's report, the City considers both buildings to be worthy of retention due to their cultural heritage significance. Moving on to statement by Jackie Greenshields of Salisbury Street. Thank you.
Dear Deputy Mayor, Councillors, CEO and staff, I support the officer's recommendation for the demolition to be refused for the 11 outlined reasons on page 6 and 7 of tonight's report. I'd also like to thank the officers for one of the most comprehensive reports on a heritage-related item in my 20 years of actively promoting our historic built fabric, our heritage areas and our cultural history. I'd also like to acknowledge the many submissions and the quality of the comments from the community members that said they did not want to see the row of 7 identical single-storey shops and the Old West Theatre completely demolished. It was a great response and shows the value the community places on our city's heritage buildings, streetscapes and heritage tourism. I'd also like to acknowledge the City of Subiaco for obtaining 2 new independent heritage assessments from the Stephen Carrick Architects and John Taylor Architects. Combined with the Heritage Council of WA's preliminary reviews, these 2 quality heritage assessments have brought to light so many more historic details that were missing from previous assessments. This new information overwhelmingly validates how culturally significant these buildings are in our Rockaby Road and Hay Street heritage area, and how they now warrant inclusion on the City of Subiaco's heritage list. See the quotes by John Taylor Architects. So what will Rockaby Road and Hay Street heritage area lose if the demolition is granted? We will lose 100% of all heritage buildings on the northern side of Hay Street, east of Rockaby. They will all disappear. The north side of Hay Street will no longer be in a heritage area. The only building left on the northern side west of Rockaby will be the Regal Theatre. We will lose 8 retail heritage shops, and the 7 identical shops, which are very rare, are the only row of intact single-storey shop fronts at the street level in the entire City of Subiaco area, displaying uniform LED lights, mirrored shop dividers, decorative marble base panels and recessed doorways. And they are the only shops that display continuous original mirror vertical panels, and they are original based on the 1925 film that I uncovered at the State Library. We will lose the only row of single-storey identical shops in the Rockaby and Roe Hay Street heritage area, because all others are 2-storey. We must put more emphasis on the single-storey shops. Single-storey shops with street-level heritage features intact are very rare in Subiaco and must be preserved. Many shop windows are now metal at base level. The Old West Theatre at 44 Hay Street, Subiaco, is a very early example of a picture theatre in suburban Perth. It is Subiaco's first vaudeville picture theatre and therefore has a rarity value. If demolished, the city loses any connection and identity with famous Australians and West Australians, including Philip Norman Appleby and Edward Alfred Whittaker, who were managers, Thomas Anthonus, who was the architect, and the Mizzen brothers, famous Subiaco builders who built the theatre, and Samuel Rosenthal, famous for theatre Art Deco buildings, and he remodelled it in 1928. In summary, the demolition of the West Theatre and former shops will significantly reduce the aesthetic heritage value and the overall cultural heritage significance of the Rockaby Road and Hay Street heritage area, and the application to demolish should not be supported. To conclude, I would like to read the following. Historic town centres are in danger of losing their individual identity and special character through the replacement of traditional shop fronts with modern, unsympathetic frontages. Extensive town centre redevelopment schemes means that traditional shop fronts are being gradually eroded. Retail design forms part of the cultural and social history of our urban areas, and the presence of traditional designs makes a significant contribution to the architectural merit of townscapes, a factor so important for encouraging tourism. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And the officer comment also agrees with you, both buildings to be worthy of retention due to their cultural heritage significance. Moving on, thank you. We have Mr. Malcolm Mackay representing Hay Street, Subiaco. Thank you, Mr. Mackay.
Good evening, everyone. Malcolm Mackay from Mackay Urban Design. This may go down in history as the shortest deputation I've ever given. I'm speaking on behalf of the owners of the property. Sanur disputes the recommendation of the report and notes that it contains inaccurate information along with incorrect interpretation of policy and misguided assumptions. However, based on previous experience, I don't expect anything I say will change your minds tonight, so I'm not actually going to say anything more and instead save my energies for the next stage of the process, which will inevitably be SAT. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Mackay, can I ask you exactly what policy you're referring to in terms of the inaccuracies?
I don't have the marked up copy with me, but it refers to the report refers to a wide range of policies, including your LPP 3.6 or 3.8, whatever the number is at the moment, the Subiaco Activity Centres policy, your own LPS 5, and the SPP on heritage matters, which I think from memory was 3.5.
Thank you. Yes, for clarity, there is the local planning policy 3.6 and the state policy 3.5. Then there's the city activity centre plan and the town planning scheme. I note that the officer report states that a comment is that they state their report is factual and correct. Can you give any examples to further explain your statement?
I don't have the documentation with me at the moment, so I'm not in a position to be able to do that. I think the correct forum for picking apart the policy in great detail is not a public statement at the council meeting, and I would prefer to reserve that until we get to SAT, on the assumption that this ends up at SAT, which provides the forum for going into much greater detail in regard to interpretations of policy.
Thank you, Malcolm. Moving on to item 6, petitions and approved deputations. There are none. Announcements by the presiding member without discussion. There is none. We move on to item 8, reports for presentation. We have special counsel point 1, and it is for 424 to 428 and 440 Hay Street, Subiaco, demolition of existing commercial buildings. Do I have a mover and a seconder for this item? Thank you, Councillor McMullen. Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Councillor McMullen, would you like to speak to the item?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Look, I think this is an item which really illustrates the complex position that we as councillors and we as a council find ourselves in from time to time. There's definite competing interests, and they're somewhat polar. Not all of the interests can be adequately met. We've got a landowner who rightly wants to maximise the value of their asset, and they want to develop it. And frankly, that requires a degree of demolition, and something has to be removed from the site. However, we've also got plenty of people in the community who believe buildings like these should be preserved because they form a valuable part of the streetscape and the character of the area. And we've heard two pretty impressive sets of submissions this evening. So look, we've got to solve this on planning grounds, and what's the right way forward? Well, the applicant's consultants tell us one thing, although perhaps we weren't told a great deal tonight. But what we're being told by the applicant's consultants is directly at odds with what our own planning staff are telling us. And I'm aware of a recurring theme of late. That is that applicants and their representatives are telling us or saying to each other in their own circles that when our staff recommend something, we should listen. Now, if that holds true when there's a recommendation for approval, then it must equally hold true when there's a recommendation for refusal, as there is tonight. So I'm going to approach this decision just as I would any decision. There's nothing particularly special about planning in this sense. In my view, the correct starting point when business comes to council is to accept the professional advice of our staff at face value. We need to be able to accept and trust in their experience and trust that everything they do in the city's best interest. So to go against an officer recommendation, I'd be looking for pretty cogent, strong reasons. The applicant prior to tonight has provided us reasons, but there's nothing in front of me that gives me the confidence that their reasons are better than our own staff's. Don't get me wrong, I've certainly voted against lots of officer recommendations in the past, and I'll continue to do so when appropriate. But at the end of the day, this applicant's made it abundantly clear that they want these buildings gone, and they attempted to achieve this earlier in the year on safety grounds, and ultimately that expert advice didn't stack up. So I suppose the question now is, does the expert advice stack up in a planning sense? Look, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but perhaps this is just one of those things where it's a matter on which reasonable minds may differ. So if that's the case, then where I'm left is an officer recommendation that's pretty unequivocal and not enough reason to deviate from it. Certainly the presentation hasn't got the application over the line in my mind. So I'll be supporting the officer recommendation and supporting the buildings and refusing demolition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McMullen. Councillor Jennings, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just very briefly, our built heritage in Subiaco is very important to Subiaco's future, and I'm not seeing any reason why any of us tonight should be disagreeing with the staff's recommendation, which fully supports the retention of these buildings, which are, as I said, part of our history and built heritage and contribute so much to the area and the character of that area. So, as is already indicated, I'm going to be supporting staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Is anybody else who would like to speak to this item? Thank you, Councillor Nash.
Thank you. My intention is to vote against the staff recommendation, but I wish to make it clear at the outset that I'm not against the possibility of incorporating the facades of these two buildings into a new development. And I am generally in favour of retention of heritage buildings. I certainly agree with Councillor Jennings that Subiaco's heritage is a very important part of our community. But I'm prepared to leave that decision to the experts in this case as to whether it is heritage or not, and from what I can determine of my reading of the various reports is that the jury is still out in that regard. Earlier this year, we approved an LDP that proposed putting a laneway through the existing facade of one of the buildings, which would appear to be at odds with the recommendation to not demolish. Also, a refusal to demolish could potentially lead to an enormous cost for our ratepayers defending the decision without any guarantee at all that such a decision would ultimately be upheld. It could also see the city tied up for years in legal proceedings, whilst, as Councillor Rowe likes to say, Rome burns, with Hay Street remaining partially closed and businesses, our town centre and our ratepayers suffering as a result. As a city, I think we risk long-term reputational damage and a diminution of our ability to attract new businesses. I personally would prefer to see a resolution of this matter that does not disadvantage the city, but also allows the applicant to progress their plans. There's no reason this can't be a win-win for both parties. That would include, as a minimum, a reopening of Hay Street, a demolition of all or part of the facade as appropriate, an appropriate application of the local development plan recently approved, an agreement on Seddon Street, and last but not least, an agreement on the future of the city-owned right-of-way that runs through the middle of the site. I cannot therefore in good conscience vote for the staff recommendation as it stands, and I will therefore be voting no.
Thank you, Councillor Nash. Councillor De Vries.
Through you, presiding member, this is a question for the Manager for Planning Services, I believe. There's been some suggestion tonight that there'd be a possibility of a partial demolition and that we retain the facade, but it's my understanding that this is about simply demolishing the buildings. There is no provision. This is my understanding. So my question is there a provision within this application for a partial demolition, or is it just for a complete demolition? And that's the only option being offered. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, presiding member, yes, the application is for complete demolition.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to this item? Okay, moving 4.7 and 4.8. I just wish to bring out that the council did not approve the local development plan to demolish the I think it's probably number 424. What we did approve was for the local development plan to go out for public consultation, and that local development plan is yet to come back to the city for our consideration. Whether we then proceed to decide on whether we will modify that plan or accept it as it is, depending on the public consultation, that's still all up in the air. And yes, my understanding was that the demolition is for all of the buildings, not part. There hasn't been any suggestion from Sanur that they're interested in keeping any of the facade. In fact, just promoted you, Mr. Malcolm Mackay. Mr. Mackay actually, who designed the project at the SAT hearing, said he was against facadism, which would involve retaining part of the facade. He made that very clear at the SAT hearing. In light of all that and what has been said this evening, I support the staff recommendation to not approve the demolition. It's an excellent report, and I commend the staff on the standard of the report. Councillor McMullen, would you like to close the debate?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. One thing I probably neglected to mention in my opening was that, yes, Hay Street's closed and it's bad for business and it's potentially bad for the reputation of the city. What we should ask ourselves and ask our community to ask themselves is that a problem that the city's created? Well, if it is a problem, it's one that hasn't been created unreasonably. Good decision making requires that we set policies and we apply those policies. And as far as I can tell, that's what we're doing on this occasion. So look, I don't think we need to fear SAT. If the matter goes to SAT, then like most matters in SAT, it will probably also go to mediation. Mediation, unlike Hay Street, is a two-way street. So let's see what happens there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put this item to the vote. Thank you. Thank you, Council. The item has been carried 5-1. Now, councillors, we did have a second item, SC2, any other matters associated with the properties. We had that item on the agenda in case we had some news perhaps from the SAT hearing to consider. But from checking from the CEO today, we do not. Do we have anything else to add, CEO? No, we do not. So therefore, we move on to agenda item 9 and the closure of the meeting. I declare the City of Subiaco Special Council meeting of the 27th of May 2021 closed at 7:31 p.m. Thank you. Thank you to members of the gallery for your attendance. Thank you, elected members, for your work, and to staff for their work as well.